Hello, good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here today. Just going to give us a moment for the Zoom magic to work and get everybody in. Okay, excellent. So welcome to the Environmental Science, Justice, and Healing series. I'm Danny Wilson, the Executive Director of the Cancer and Environment Network of Southwestern Pennsylvania, with my colleague, Andre Green, and our partner, Dr. Tina Endo at the University of Pittsburgh and her team. We are very excited to bring this event back to Pittsburgh for a second year. Last year, we had a 3-day summit, all in person, all at the same time. And this year, we wanted to spread the fun out over a longer period of time. We're hosting 5 events over the course of 2 months. We have 3 in person and 2 are virtual. We are super grateful to Kelly Henderson from Grounded Strategies for developing this virtual interactive session titled Transforming Land to Improve Public Health Outcomes. I want to note that this is more than a webinar. We will be seeking your participation in about 30 to 40 minutes, so please consider yourself forewarned. We look forward to seeing you and speaking with you then. Now, throughout our series, we are focusing on 5 areas of the environment and environmental justice: the built environment, land equity, air equity, water equity, and food justice. But just like all things in our interdependent and complex world, you will see weaving of these themes throughout the entire series. Today, we are focused on land equity, and we've already witnessed land transformation in Homewood, spearheaded by Oasis Farm when we had our opening session on May 8th. And we also were able to engage in an interactive neighborhood audit on that day. And in the closing session of this series, we will be on site at the Freeman Family Farm in Manchester. To get us started today, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Daniel Bay from the University of Pittsburgh. Daniel.
Thanks, Danny. So Andre, let's go to the next slide, please. So I want to start off with something that's not really in Pittsburgh, but I think really underlines the need for planning and thinking, because this is an example we've sort of been playing with over the last several months that's kind of shocking. So, the region is challenged with landslides. Most of us has probably seen one. Some of us have probably been rerouted on our commute. It's a problem. On the lower left in this slide, you can see the landslide that was, occurring over most of last spring up in Mars Township. You may have seen it in the news, but you can see right there that it's coming very close to people's homes. But, we've known about landslides for a long time. 1985, the USGS mapped all of the landslides in the region. And in the last year, the U.S. Geological Survey put out a product where they tracked land use from 1985 to 2023 every year. So what we did is we looked at all the landslides that occurred. So all those little dots on there, particularly the red ones, are historical landslides. And we said, how much have they changed? How much more developed land use occurs in these landslides between 1985 and 2023? And you can see each of those dark red dots, 70 to 100% of the landslide has changed from something forest, open, something other than developed to developed land. So in this case, we've built out onto areas that are by definition vulnerable. And, I'm not sure why it occurred. I mean, it's a fast kind of thing, but it's something that we need to think about. And because in particular, during these periods of development, decisions are made and they can become obscured and poor decisions can be made. Andre, next slide, please. So this is a map probably most of you have seen before in some version or another. These are the homeowners loan corporation maps that were done in the 1930s and 40s, where people went around to neighborhoods in most of the cities that were built out at that time and graded the neighborhoods based on, mostly who was living there. So areas that were wealthy and relatively homogeneous with I mean, the majority of that time population were given A's. Places that were poorer and had, minority populations were given D's. So here's Pittsburgh. And, the question in the problem is these areas have persisted. Um, Next slide, Andre. But, part of it developed because of, our historical situation. On the stars that I've added to the map are those areas cataloged by the Rivers of Steel the historical site there. And those are anything that sort of had any touch of steel production. So you can see that there's a strong, strong concentration of stars in the areas that are red, in the areas that have been given a D. And so, this is part of what's setting it up, because I'm going to be talking in the long run about, the soil metals and the kinds of things you have to think about as you're transitioning from vacant lots to something else. Andre, can we go to the next slide, please? Because not only was there this sort of historical driver of, people who worked in the factories lived near the factories at that point, but as we reorganized the road network, you can see that some of these transportation corridors, some of these highways went right through the areas that were graded Ds. Now, I mean, and there's political reasons, there's less power in those areas. There's less ability to avoid this kind of thing. But in general, not only do you have an industrial past, but now you have these major transportation corridors coming through your neighborhood if you live in one of them. Andre, next slide, please. And so one of the things that we've been trying to do in my time at Pitt is try to figure out exactly how bad things were, where things went, and when did they start and end. And this is a picture of a little pond up near Harmer. And one of the things we do in my group, in my research, is we go out and take sediment cores, because every year there's a little bit of sediment added to the bottom of the pond. And if you can sort of take it out, you can say, oh, this is where this kind of change in metal concentration occurred. And so this was a Harmer we figured would be northeast, so it would be downwind of Pittsburgh. We wanted a good idea of like the creation and the cessation of the steel industry. How did that change the chemistry in the area? Because U.S. Steel's archives are not very, they're not very open. J&L is kind of fragmented. All of these old steel production places, it's not great. You can see that, it's an urban pond. It's not the Alpine Lake. Some of my colleagues go out and core. But, so we were very hopeful that was going to tell us exactly, the dynamics. How bad did it get? When did it get there? This was Memphis Hill's dissertation work. She's a student. She's now in Alaska working in a postdoc there. But one of the things that occurred in this pond is that cadmium, copper, and zinc all went up about the same period. Lead was always sort of high. It never went up. It never went down. But this is not kind of this. It went up in between the 1930s and the 1940s. That's sort of out of sync with the steel production activity. And so we were like, what's going on? And it took us a long time. We were looking for one mess. We were looking for this idea of what was going on in Pittsburgh. And what we ended up finding was another mess, that this was mostly the roads. This pond is more connected to 376 than we first recognized. Going back and taking a second look, we realized there's a direct connection between the 376 stormwater management systems and this pond. And so, you can see some evidence of good stuff. Taking cadmium out of the tires, things started to move. But the point is, and if we could go to the next slide, Andre, please. That if you start stacking things up, you have this historical steel production relatively close. We didn't necessarily capture it up in Harmer, which would be up in the upper right-hand corner of this map. But then layered on top of that, you have these transportation corridors, which have really big, impactful consequences for local soils. So you're sort of stacking these inputs on top of each other. Then the last thing I want to talk to you about is sort of what goes on in between the houses or the structures and the roads. So the lead paint coming off of structures causes a lot of soil pollution. The historical tetraethyl lead that was added to gasoline throughout much of the second half of the 20th century was deposited near roads and has stayed near roads. So we have, if you want to avoid lead, if you want to avoid problems, on average, if you avoid the structures, the historical structures of the roads, you can avoid lead problems. But we really don't know what's going on in between. And that's one of the last things I want to talk about, because Alex Maxon's work, where we go to the next slide, we went around, we were able to use a sampling of soils that were not on a drip line or on next to a structure or on a or were far away from the road. So this should be sort of what's going on from industrial contamination, sort of in what happened everywhere. And on the lower left, you can see this is lead concentrations, those areas in blue. These we're trying to come up with from these points, what's the continuous surface? It's a little bit tricky, but those areas in blue, and from one estimate, are those areas where you should have lead levels above the action level of 200 parts per million. And so you can see, again, tried to make those transparent so you can see where they fall in the HOLC gradings. So again, not only do you have roads, not only do you have historical industry, but these things you have this sort of accumulation of lead. And an example of how this might work, you can see in the upper right, we've taken the concentration of zinc and compared it with concentration of cadmium, because cadmium is something that's going to be coming out of coking. And so by doing the concentrations as in a ratio, you can sort of take out some of the noise that comes from big and little. And one of the things you can see, the white areas are areas where there's a lot of cadmium. So it's making that ratio low. And if you compare that to the historical coke works, Shenango up on Neville Island and that down in Hazelwood at the LTV, you can see there's a lot of cadmium that's been added to this area. And this is the kind of thing that's still going on in Clairton. So one of the challenges we're going to face, Andre, if we go to the next slide, please, is that these are complicated things. The soil metals in urban areas, we have a good idea where lead is based on the roads and the structure, but we don't know where it might be on the in-between. And so as we're making this next decision about transforming land, in the upper right, you can see Hazelwood Green. And Hazelwood Green has state-of-the-art soil testing. They know exactly the kind of challenges they're dealing with. They have a lot of ability to build things, cap things, isolate things that they don't want to have and touch, humans or anything else for that matter. Then in the lower left, you have sort of a community. This is the Hazelwood project. You're starting to grow things in areas they're not utilized, vacant lots. And it's really difficult. The County Conservation District does a great job with their XRF gun, but it's still, if you have a problem, how do you treat it? We don't have necessarily simple, easy answers. And this is kind of the what we're inheriting as we're looking to the future. How do you deal with a complicated mix of soil metals that, even people like me are just starting to scratch the surface on? So that's setting the stage. Next, we're going to go talk with Dr. Green, or no, Dr. Dangle and Dr. Walker from the law school here at Pitt, and they're going to talk more specifically about how some of these neighborhoods have evolved and dealt with these issues.
Thank you, Dan. Um, Hi, you all. I'm Jacqueline Walker. I am a professor at an adjunct professor of law at the University of Pittsburgh. And we're going to talk a little bit about two specific neighborhoods, or actually one specific neighborhood, the Hill District. And they're going to be kind of an example because we see similar things happening in other neighborhoods. But I think it's a good example to discuss not just how the land has suffered and the people have suffered, but specifically what led to those things. So let's take a look at the history of the Hill District. And one of those histories, or one of these sections of this history, starts as Arthursville or Little Haiti. So Arthursville or Little Haiti is situated in what we now understand to be the Lower Hill District. So where we see all that construction going on, PPG Paints Arena is across the street, coming all the way up to Arthur Street. So just up the hill to the middle of the Crawford Roberts neighborhood. That is what we understand to be Arthursville or Little Haiti. Why was it called Little Haiti? Well, the Haitian Revolution had just occurred. And as has always been the case in the West, we have a lot of movement between the United States, the Caribbean, and the Caribbean and South America, right? So we know that folks are constantly on the move in the New World, and that is some of what we get to see reflected in this name, Little Haiti. So at this time, 1758 to the 1880s, Arthursville, also known as Little Haiti, is a neighborhood that's expanded from downtown Pittsburgh. And the air is cleaner in the Hill District. It was an area that was considered an Underground Railroad depot and an abolitionist stronghold. This community included all types of people, including an established free Black middle class that has been there for some time. Um, Soon we saw an arrival of European immigrants to the neighborhood because, as we know, Pittsburgh kind of served as its own inland Ellis Island. And then can you go to the next slide for me, Andre? And then we get to the era of the Hill District that I think we all are a lot more familiar with, the one that is captured in all of the books and, all of the books like Smoketown, all of the storytelling that we hear is this 1880s to 1940s, which I like to call the Great Convergence, which is where everybody really got together, or the Wiley Avenue days. This also marks what we know as the Great Migration of large numbers of Black people from the South moving to the North in pursuit of safety and opportunities for work that go beyond sharecropping and significant violence that people were facing in the Southern U.S. It doesn't mean they got here and didn't experience more, but they experienced at least an improvement. They were able to pursue something better. So people moved here. We started to see the Hill District become the heart of folk culture in the city because you're having a convergence of so many different communities. And when I say so many different communities, there are Syrians, there are Black people from the South, Black people from the Caribbean, Jews, there are Polish people, Italian, everybody who we have spread out amongst the city and we identify as these nationalities first and then American, these cultures first and then American. That is what we were experiencing. And Claude McKay dubbed this the crossroads of the world. You have pictures here of the Kauffman Center. You have the Loendi Club. You have the K-Boys Club and so many other spaces that started to take shape in this era. And it's also a time when, if you speak to people from the neighborhood, they will name the fact that during this era is when we started to see the social supports go up for so many of the residents of the Hill District and for the city overall, but it's also a time when people felt as if the neighborhood was cohesive. They felt as if they could connect with each other, that they were connected to each other as a community, and that they were connected to the land as well. Can we go to the next slide, Andre? Then we have the Great Destruction. So in 1957, the URA, the Urban Redevelopment Authority, is established, and they took the Hill District by the Lower Hill by eminent domain to create the civic arena and what they were going to create, what they were going to call the cultural district. This district, which we now know rests down on Penn and Liberty Avenue in downtown Pittsburgh, this never really came to be. Instead, it became a way to move a lot of people off of very valuable land that is adjacent to the downtown corridor. And in the process, they completely gutted the Hill District. They built highways all around. And we know what comes next from that. So we saw the displacement of 8,000 people, including the demolition and the destruction of Big Bethel AME Church, one of the oldest churches in the city, but also the largest congregation in the city. And we also saw 400 businesses, dozens of churches and other synagogues, and many other places. People ended up being displaced to other places. And so that's where you start to see folks landing in Homewood, Knoxville. You see folks landing over on the north side. You see folks going further and further east, and also going south and west and landing in places like Belsuver as well. The next blow to the Hill District were the riots after MLK's death. And then, which also saw not just the destruction of the main corridor of businesses, but also you saw a lot of people leaving after that. And then with the loss of the steel industry, we got to see the real destruction of the community. We will not even get into the 1980s and 90s, where we saw yet another round of people from the community end up incarcerated, which we do not talk about a lot, but is actually really important in light of the war on drugs. Let's move forward, Andre. Thank you. And so today, from the 90s to the present, what you've seen is people really fighting for their community. And you have a number of communities, organizations such as the Hill District Consensus Group, the Hill CDC, and a number of others that have maintained their relationship and their dedication to the community and to seeing its people thrive, and who are dedicated to seeing the land thrive. And we see that happening in our master planning processes, as well as in our green planning processes. The Hill District has a lot of plans. And so we also see this happening in other places around the community. But one of the things that we don't talk about as much is how so much of the loss and the destruction of losing so many people in 1957, so many people displaced, is how it's resulted in a number of vacant lots. The loss of the steel industry resulted in a number of people abandoning their homes and having to pick up and leave to find better futures and more opportunities in other places. And so what we are now experiencing, I am a Hill District resident, and what we are now experiencing is vacant lots that are not kept very well. And just the vastness of that is really hard to hold as a resident. And it's really hard to hold as a community and as a city. Andre, can you go to the next slide, please? And so I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Stephanie Dangle, who's going to tell us a little bit more about what it means to stand in the shadow of the ivory tower. You're muted, Stephanie.
Apologies, sorry. I think it's important to note that while we have a lot of university speakers here today trying to do good work, that there is also a bad role being played by universities in the sense of gentrifiers. This book, In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower, does an incredible job of noting that in many cities, New York, Chicago, but it's also happening in Pittsburgh. Some of it's in terms of student housing that continues to creep into neighborhoods where other people were displaced. It's also the construction of university complexes, including some of the sports facilities at the University of Pittsburgh. And there were also plans at one point to really destroy a neighborhood between Pitt and CMU with a first sort of filling in that Panther Hollow and then as a connector that's been put on hold. But again, all of these are examples of how universities can gentrify neighborhoods. And what we are trying to do, I think, is to play a different role for universities as educators. Pitt has community engagement centers where faculty, staff, students have an opportunity to work with the community to play a different role. Those centers often provide community resources as well, spaces for the community to have events, and educational resources. But I think it's important to call out that universities are not neutral players in this world. Next slide, please. So as we talk about the present, we have both challenges and opportunities in terms of vacant lots. The city of Pittsburgh owns over 12,000 vacant lots, but all told, there are closer to 30,000 vacant lots in the city of Pittsburgh. Professor Walker and I have been working on a class for a number of years now called Wicked Problem Innovation, where we are trying to green those vacant lots. We're focused primarily on two neighborhoods, the Middle Hill District and the Knoxville area, where we have tried to provide opportunities for community-led greening of those lots along with the benefits. Next slide. So why are vacant lots a problem? I mean, they obviously compromise the quality of life. They reduce property values, making it more difficult for people who want to leave the neighborhood to sell their properties. They weaken the tax base as those property values go down, and they drain significant government resources that are estimated to cost at least $500 towards vacant lot for when they are maintained. But as you can see, they are often not maintained and thus provide a lot of negative impact in terms of the neighborhood. Next slide. Professor Walker, would you like to talk a little bit about these studies?
So one of the main studies that our work relies upon is the University of Pennsylvania worked along with the Philadelphia Horticultural Society to green vacant lots. And in this study, what they did is they first tried to figure out what is the cost of this? What is the cost of this vacant land, of this uncared for land? And so first they asked questions about how residents were feeling who lived adjacent to these lots. And then they followed their study up by asking how they felt after the lots were green. And greening is actually really important because it's more than just mowing the lots, right? Like people think I'm going to come and mow and it's going to be fine. All the stuff grows right back up. So greening the lot really is about putting a fence, putting trees and other vegetation and plants, and really making the space look and feel as if it's cared for because the land is being cared for. And what we saw were that residents found on the other side of those greening projects that 76% increase in the use of outside spaces for relaxing and socializing. We saw a 69% decrease in the feeling of depression, a 58% decrease in safety concerns when people were going outside of their homes. So we saw a public safety push. We saw a 37% decrease in perceptions of crime and a 29% decrease in gun violence. So when we think about how we are spending our resources on fighting these things, whether it is mental health and having mental health supports, or we're talking about public safety concerns, the greening of vacant land can have huge impacts for very little inputs. Can we go to the next slide? However, there are some challenges that are caused by greening vacant land. We can't go around doing it all willy-nilly. And a part of that is because what we've seen is that in a follow-up study, there was a 4.3 rise in value of these lots after 1 year. However, after 6 years, there was a 13% cumulative increase. And what that means is, while we obviously want we want to see property values increase. We want people to have more access to economic justice. One of the things that can happen is you start to have environmental gentrification. And it's also known as eco-gentrification. And what that means is basically you start making the neighborhood look pretty, and now people with resources want to move to the neighborhood. But it also comes at a cost, and that cost can be displacement of businesses and other things, because existing residents' incomes and access to capital just isn't keeping up with the influx of new neighbors with more capital and more income. Next slide. So one of the questions that we are working through, we do not have the answers. I'm telling you this right now. We are trying to figure it out. And that's why our class is called Wicked Problems. But the main thing is we're focusing our efforts on centering justice. While it is wonderful to be able to say we would like to green vacant lots, one of the things we learned in our first iteration of this class is that the community has more needs, right? And green land is not necessarily at the top of the list. What we also know, though, however, is that by taking care of land around the neighborhood, that you can have be a much better support to affordable housing opportunities, to commercial business opportunities and Main Street opportunities that the community wants to create. And so one of the things we also focus on is that the projects are community-led, and we advocate for community-led land care and development. And a big part of that is how we are able to center justice. What does it mean for people to have their vision of where they want to live come to life? And how much power does that build? And so that is a lot of what we're operating from. And those are the things that are important to moving ahead. The other ways to do it is through community ownership. And so this is why we're also looking at community land trusts, cooperatives, and doing multi-use and multi-phase design. In this context, we think about what it means to take a vacant lot, turn it to green space, and then move forward from there to perhaps eventually put housing on that land, eventually put a business on that land. But for now, the community gets to decide what that process looks like. Next slide. And so this also falls into the progress that we're seeing in the present. These are not dreams or things that we're making up. These exist within our community already. There is the longest standing housing cooperative in the city in Belmar Gardens. We have community land trusts that are already operating in our community, and some that are on their way to being created and dreamed up right now. But at the heart of it, centering self-determination and making sure that residents have the tools to be self-determined in how their communities evolve is really the most important thing that we can do right now. So I'm gonna pass it on to Kayla Prendergrass and Isabella Gross, who are going to talk more about the comp plan, because the comp plan is insanely important, and your participation in the comp plan is really important in being able to advocate for and access the tools that you need to be self-determined. So
thanks, Jackie, and thanks, Stephanie, and thanks, Dan. Yeah, so like Jackie said, the comp plan is in process right now. This is a plan that we're doing at the entire city. The Department of City Planning is leading the effort, but we are working with all of the city departments and really as many people as we possibly can. So if we want to go to the next slide, I can give you kind of a quick summary of what a comprehensive plan is. And so it is a citywide plan that really looks to focus on how we can create a holistic and community-wide vision for the city. So this includes all things like land use, zoning, housing, economic development. Where do we have parks? Where are we doing stormwater management? Where do we plant trees? All kinds of different things about what our neighborhoods and communities look and feel like. And so the other major component of this is that we're looking to address a lot of the things that we've been hearing about today. So how do we make sure that the past injustices and harms that, you know, our city has done to residents can be remediated through this plan? We all know the things that have happened in the Hill District. Is an example that we've been talking about today. And, you know, how do we work to address these things? These are things that, you know, are a product of pretty bad land planning and bad land use and really harmful practices done by, you know, our governments and our leadership. And so it's really about addressing these and also, you know, acknowledging them and making sure that we can kind of work towards building an equitable future using a just transition model. And that's really our goal with this comprehensive plan is how do we level set? How do we acknowledge the harms? And then what do we do going forward? How do we make sure that the vision that we're crafting is actually going to be sustainable and equitable going forward? So next slide.
Yeah, and so comprehensive plans are, you know, a little bit different from other plans that you all may have read that have been published by the city, but are very much complementary to kind of the other plans that we've published over the years. And so just to kind of give an overview, comprehensive plans cover all topics at a kind of a high level, whereas, you know, citywide topic plans that you've read, potentially the Pittsburgh Housing Needs Assessment, kind of focus on a single topic, but, you know, cover the entire city. Neighborhood plans kind of are covering a large number of topics, but focus on a geography. And then there's master plans that are done for neighborhoods or parks or kind of sections of neighborhoods that kind of are a little bit more detailed. And then, you know, our zoning code kind of serves as a plan in itself as well, and kind of determines, you know, uses at the parcel level or the lot level. And so all of these past plans are kind of going into the comprehensive plan. And yeah, it's kind of, you know, being used as a way to get ahead to kind of avoid and anticipate harm, such as, you know, environmental gentrification and things that we've talked about on this call so far. Next slide, please. And so to kind of put it into context a little bit more, there are 20 topic areas that have come out of the comprehensive plan. It is a large plan, but, you know, every topic area kind of goes into detail. So we're covering topics such as land use, urban design, neighborhoods, population demographics, you know, environmental justice, climate action, waste, energy, parks and open space, mobility and transportation. I don't need to list them all, but you know, the chapters are complementary to each other. They kind of weave in and out of each other, and but they also kind of maintain their own kind of focus. And so kind of from some research, we found that economic opportunity, housing, stormwater and rainfall, and public health and safety are kind of top priorities that we'd like to address with the plan, and also that residents would like us to address with the plan. Next slide, please. And so Kayla and I, as environmental planners at the city, have we kind of lead our own chapters. I'm leading the Parks and Open Space chapter, and Kayla's leading the Stormwater Management chapter. And then we also kind of have support roles on some of the other chapters, such as environmental justice and food policy. And so to show as an example kind of in what detail we go into when we're kind of thinking through these chapters is these are kind of screenshots of some topic area, kind of 4-page topic area worksheets that are on our comp plan website that kind of summarize existing conditions, and then also kind of bring to light the challenges that we're really trying to focus on with these chapters. So for parks and open space, you know, we, as Dr. Walker kind of alluded to, there are so many public health benefits that parks and green spaces can offer us. And so a lot of the work that we're trying to do is to expand parks and greenways specifically, especially on our kind of steeply sloped land and the landslide prone land, trying to expand those spaces and kind of conserve those spaces as well to keep our urban canopy cover. And so some parks challenges are, as many of you probably know, park conditions have deteriorated over time. Our park quality is low. More than half of parks are kind of deemed as fair or in poor condition. And then, as we kind of battle natural systems taking over, invasive species and climate change, we're really trying to harp on the maintenance aspect of continuing to maintain and keep our green spaces in good condition so folks can really benefit from them. Kayla, you can talk about stormwater.
Yeah, so we know that these issues are all kind of connected, and there's a lot of moving parts within them, and this is really the case with stormwater. Like Dr. Bain was saying, stormwater not only is sort of our management of it is impacting flooding and public health and safety, it's also impacting the ability for folks to grow food in their communities. Stormwater management has a large effect on the movement of pollution throughout our society and throughout our systems. And so if we're not managing it effectively, coming from high pollutant areas and managing that water and making sure that it is getting clean before it's going into other spaces, we risk the effects of things that we're seeing now, which is that communities that really could benefit and really utilize improved food equity and food access aren't really able to grow food in their neighborhoods because of the lasting pollution that exists in their communities due to the movement of this pollution in stormwater in our systems. And so all of these things are really interconnected, and we're hoping that the comprehensive plan can highlight all of these interconnectedness and also be a way for us to see a path forward for solving a lot of these wicked problems and figuring out how we can make a better city for everyone. And yeah, we want to make Pittsburgh 2050 the Pittsburgh that people really are excited about and proud of, and where they want to be living. And so I'm going to throw the link to the comprehensive plan website in the chat, as well as to our 90 to 1 campaign. Please feel free to review the website as well as fill out all the surveys. There will be upcoming events soon. There's going to be a public forum. We had to cancel it due to the storm, but it'll be coming out soon. So keep an eye on the website to see more details on that. And we really just want to make sure that we get as much engagement on this as possible. We're hoping to reach 30,000 residents, hopefully more. And so please feel free to share your voice. I'm going to now pass it over to Dr. Harrington, and she's going to be talking about the Building Utopia card deck.
Hello. Thank you all for inviting me and having me today. And I appreciate the topics that I've heard thus far, dealing with land justice and thinking about how to kind of integrate design justice into specifically the Pittsburgh area. You can go to the next slide. Just a little bit about myself, my work. I work in doing community-based participatory research, community-based participatory design, and now collective futuring. And I'll share with you all today about how this has led to what we've been doing with Building Utopia and how that kind of ties in with design justice and land justice. Next slide. So a large part of the work that I do is thinking about who is able to participate in design justice and design futuring and how we can reimagine our present world. And this is actually a billboard here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It was in the neighborhood of East Liberty and put up by an artist, Alicia Warnsley, who had these words blown up and displayed to call attention to the Black bodies, families, homes in history that are often forgotten and gentrification efforts. And this text has kind of become the basis of both protest and collective dreaming to reassure the presence of Black people and other minority communities and how we think about the future. Next slide. And today, we see that this is such a big area, such a huge area of need, because we see that there is this really huge gap with the current landscape of design, only seeing 7% Hispanic representation and only 3% Black representation, meaning the folks who are coming up with the solutions for the things are not often the folks who look like the people who are most impacted by those solutions. whether it be technology, whether it be the built environment, whether it be the ways that we're thinking about digital tools and so forth. Next slide. And so in thinking about a more equitable design landscape and design practice, many scholars and practitioners are beginning to engage frameworks such as Afrofuturism and Afrofuturist feminism as legitimate critical frameworks that center the lived experiences of Black identities and other historically excluded populations. And kind of thinking as of this as a more liberatory oriented approach to design, and recognizing contributions of Black cultural experiences, minority cultural experiences as being essential in more equitable design practices, and how we can kind of decolonize the ways that design has impacted the built environment and the things that we engage with on an everyday basis. Next slide. And so, for example, we see this concept of drawing on perspectives of those most impacted by design. In this example of working with Indigenous peoples to help map Indigenous territories, treaties, and languages through the Native Land digital app. And this is pulled from the Design Justice Network as one of the resources of thinking about climate change and climate justice, or environmental justice or land justice. And organizations such as Design Justice Network and Design as Protest and Design Action Collective have begun to do this work. And next slide. And this is where we kind of see this next slide. Sorry. This is kind of where we see this intersection of how we think about the future and liberation. And what we've done with Building Utopia is kind of bring in this contribution of, well, Afrofuturism also brings in the imagination aspect of that, kind of by thinking about race and social cultural context, social political context of different groups and populations in the future. And when we think, like, according to Yatasha Womack, Afrofuturism is an intersection of imagination, technology, the future, and liberation. And so Afrofuturism may just help to build a world where all design is kind of considered. Next slide. Afrofuturism and other diasporic approaches to futuring, such as African futurism or Chicana futurism, often share or all share a vision of reimagining societal shortcomings to push progress and new existences for those with historically marginalized identities. So there's this opportunity to examine any conversation that focuses on the intersection of race and design and environments and innovation through a lens of radical futuring. Next slide. We're seeing now with projects like the PAC project by Stephanie Dinkins and 51 Futures and anti-racist design prop-ups by a good friend of mine, Chris Rudd, done out in Chicago, what it means to engage minority communities in envisioning futures that involve their neighborhoods, their communities. The image on the lower left is actually kind of like this activation that Chris was doing in the south side of Chicago for a while, kind of having folks think about what does an equitable Chicago look like in the south side corridor, and engaging people in like doing design thinking in this kind of very participatory way that kind of led to community gardens, that led to kind of some of these like food disbursement, like health, like public health or kind of giving out food and things like that, all in the neighborhood. And so we're kind of seeing the impacts of engaging more liberatory approaches to community design and participatory design that involve folks getting directly involved in saying, this is what we want our community, our environment, our neighborhood to look like in the future, and how we can bring that into now, how we can start planning some of that now. Next slide. As just a quick snippet of some of the work that was done to inform how we're thinking about Afrofuturist and liberatory speculative design, we explored Black and Brown communities envisioning futures for their communities by conducting a series of speculative co-design workshops with the residents of the South Side of Chicago, the Bronzeville corridor, in partnership with the Design Apprenticeship Program at the Arts and Public Life Performing Center, which was founded by Theaster Gates out there, and it kind of works in conjunction with the University of Chicago. Next slide. And so we build on that work by directly situating Afrofuturism as culturally empathetic ways to think about technology innovation and what youth of the Design Apprenticeship Program wanted a more equitable Chicago to look like coming out of the pandemic and isolation and quarantine, and where we really just have an opportunity to kind of rethink systems and structures that impacted them directly. Next slide. A lot of what we gained from this project was that there's inherent value in looking at Afrofuturism as a lens for Black and Brown communities to see themselves as the architects of the futures of their communities, placing themselves as both the protagonists of their own future scenarios, as the ones who invent systems that directly impact where they live, the ones who consider the lines between technology and humanity, and as engaging in new design language that eliminates exclusivity and privileged approaches to brainstorming. Next slide. So from this, we began to kind of engage Black and Brown communities in the design process to speculate futures of technology or even community itself, built environment, or even what it just means to gather in proximity with folks. How do we make this more equitable? How do we shift from traditional participatory methods to being more community-led and community-driven? And considering what that means for the power dynamics that are oftentimes inherent in design. Hearing a lot of folks talk about kind of who got to make decisions about what happened with the Hill and the things that were going on in Pittsburgh, we kind of see that there are folks that oftentimes sit very distant from the neighborhoods that they're designing, and they're making decisions for those neighborhoods. So how do we turn that power back to the folks that live directly in those communities? That was kind of the goal of what we were trying to do with Building Utopia, and hopefully a little bit of what you guys will get out of the activity that we do today. Next slide. And so that kind of brings us to the toolkit that we designed. Building Utopia is an Afrofuturist speculative design toolkit designed by organizers, strategists, educators to imagine the future of our communities and consider the legacy that we are leaving for those communities. Next slide. And all of this is available online, both on our website and papers, in case you want to kind of pull the framework that we've kind of defined by integrating tenets of liberatory design, emergent strategy, and Afrofuturist feminism to kind of have people think about how do we create these visions of the future that emphasize both illuminating previous history. So thinking about, you know, people that are indigenous to the land, people that are native to the neighborhoods, who have been here, who, you know, whose families go back generations to particular cities, while also defining liberatory futures, counter storytelling, using critical imagination, and kind of just going towards equity. Next slide. So we took this liberatory framework, and you can kind of slowly click through, and we developed and drew from this work to develop this toolkit. You can continue to click through. And the toolkit consists of these cards, these prompts that ask folks to kind of think about what past or history we've come from, What are the topics that are kind of relevant to the future that we want to envision for ourselves? Using radical futuring methods to kind of facilitate those futures, and then potential solutions. You can click through. So in the activity that we'll do today, we're going to use the liberation and the topics toolkits to kind of have folks thinking through some areas that relate both to design justice, but also land and climate justice, environmental justice, and some of the issues that we're currently facing now. And I think we've all kind of can acknowledge that we're going to be kind of really knee deep in for the next decade or so, with just the ways that things are going in a lot of cities dealing with gentrification and just climate challenges. Next slide. And some of the values that kind of come out of using the toolkit to address these challenges and these topic areas is being able to support equity and who gets to design and shift the way that Black and Brown communities see themselves, counteracting historical marginalization, and allowing groups to tackle complex social and cultural issues. Next slide. So I know we have 40 folks on the call. You can go to the next slide and I'll kind of just explain, and then I want to look at Kelly or Andre to figure out how we'll split people up into groups, but you can, it should, if you click that again, it should show, oh, nope, go back. I don't think these are the, these aren't the slides that are in.
We can actually take that 10-minute break before giving the activity instructions,
Okay,
if that works, Christina.
perfect. That's perfect.
All right, y'all. Everybody, please come back at 11:11. Go take a bio break. Do what you need to do. It's beautiful outside. Go breathe some air and put your feet in the grass or whatever you need. And then we'll see you back at 11:11.
All right, so we'll go ahead and start the share outs. Starting with group one, Erin's gonna talk us through. So I'll just so we have the format, our liberation card read what liberation looks like for our community and how do you define liberation in your community. And our topic was addressing food deserts. So Erin, if you wanna walk through what those values were, and then some of what we discussed about addressing the topics of food deserts. Thanks. Someone is moving the board.
So Aaron, you are muted.
I'm gonna keep the board here, Aaron, if you could zoom in, just so it's visible.
I think I was trying to, let's see. There we go. Now I can see a little bit better. I think our responses to this question and leading into the food deserts really reflected Dan and my background in metals contamination, metals toxicology, and concern with metals as a hazard for food. And as far as what does liberation look like, actually having a clean environment and having the power to clean up the environment to have reduce the hazards in soils that might be going into community gardens, but really reducing those exposures so you're improving community health. And I think my main bias is I really want to see reduced disease burdens. I think that we have to be cognizant of how we empower the community to do this, and that we don't have gentrification that removes the community, that we actually improve community economics and education within the community to liberate them to improve their environment, improve and sustain their healthy outcomes. And quite a bit of getting good participation in land stewardship, in having them do the improvement with green infrastructure, but really having them involved also in possibly the reworking of the land and making sure that when we go and we remediate areas that would be landslides, et cetera, that we're very equitable in with the communities. And then our charge was to talk about how this would relate or what we would do with food deserts to help liberate. And of course, there's creating local gardens that are healthy and safe, making sure that we're cognizant of what's in the gardens. Planning on what types of things to plant that would help avoid some of the exposures that you would have, educating on what you could have in your gardens, et cetera. Beyond the community gardens, there's certainly a need for cooperative groceries, and actually, why don't we have large grocery stores in the in these areas that are food district? We don't know. I think one of the things, again, my bias, one of the things is that we really need to evaluate what we do for how it really reduces disease burden and improves the actual health of individuals in the community. Because I think that the more we can demonstrate that what we do improves health, the more that we will be justified in asking for more dollars to improve. And I think that, we're doing our best at Pitt to come up with engineered solutions to improve quality of gardening, quality of foods, and more access. So I'll leave it there.
All right, thanks so much, Erin. For the sake of time, let's move to group 2, who I'm guessing is group 2. Did you all have?
We could not get into Miro, but
Okay.
we have thoughts and ideas.
Okay.
So we talked about first we really discussed our understanding of like who is in our community, and something that I heard was that we had some group members who are very like who've been in their communities for a long time. One of the things that we all named was that we have multiple generations in our communities, though in some there's a, for instance, one of our group members, Chris, is a student. So he's in a student community, and that's a much more homogenous kind of experience to have. But for the most part, people are like, we have multiple ages, and people are generally friendly, which is a Pittsburgh way of being, and helpful. And some of the ways that they connect is by being in shared space, showing up for their neighbors. And some of the things that were named is like wanting to experience connection through sharing gifts, being able to go rely on the people that you are living in community with and who you live next to. And so one of the things we did discuss was community safety, and some of the ways that we talked about community safety were the question being, what do communities need to feel safe in your time? Some of the things we named were access to the basics, food and medicine, access to green space, places where people can be outside and connect with nature, plenty of third spaces. So places where people can, with intention, go and connect with other members of their neighborhood, other people who they live around. Am I missing anything, team? I'll take that as a no. So that's our share out
All right,
around
cool.
community safety. Oh, but what we wanted to note was that it was the softer things that provided community safety. I don't think anyone said we need police at
No.
all.
Okay. Very notable. All right. Moving on to group 3. There's someone from group 3 that wanted to share out.
You all want me to talk as the note taker, or does somebody else want to take it?
But
I think you said go for
Got
it.
it, Kelly.
Okay. All right. So we had folks in our group from that currently live in Swiss Helm Park, Lincoln Leamington, Belmar, Greenfield, but not for long, with a history in North Side. North Side as a favorite neighborhood, and Isabella in Central North Side. And we had the question, what's important to your community, and thinking about the things that we wish to preserve, what we're invested in. And so valuable green spaces that are already existing and that provide space for folks to interact and have different things to do, like go to farmers markets or have access to nature and quiet space and get to know their neighbors, or have job training opportunities or nature-based education. Those all were themes across multiple responses. Folks wanted to make sure that cultural institutions, for example, the Opera House, historic Opera House in Lincoln, Leamington, Belmar, was being preserved and renovated. Food insecurity and addressing that came up, and strengthening existing businesses and providing economic opportunity, and making sure that folks are given homes that are in good condition so that they can stay in them, and that there's walkability within the neighborhood. And yeah, I think that was a lot of what we talked about for the first question. And then the second one was about gentrification and how communities are kept intact in our time. And we talked about keeping housing prices lower and how you can do that in various ways, whether through rent control, land trusts, or zoning. We talked about supporting older residents through estate and will planning, so that they can transfer ownership to their heirs, and making sure that the resources like Catapult that are available to help folks know how to do that are known. We talked about making sure that homes are in good shape and using resources like Rebuilding Together in order to have healthy, well-maintained homes that are easier to say no to when someone tries to approach, a predatory person tries to approach to try to, buy up someone's home. And then we also talked about the importance of relationships for keeping communities intact, and knowing our neighbors and being able, as thinking about green spaces and activating vacant lots. Jackie already said this, but making sure that we have spaces where that can happen, and that the parks and whatever we're turning vacant lots into are activated after they've been created in order to have them be those spaces where those relationships can be built. And folks should maybe keep an eye out for, Isabella mentioned that the city is working on a gentrification toolkit, so that'll be interesting to see what's in that when that comes.
Okay. For interest of time, let's move on to group 4. And there's group 4. Oh, they're on the okay. Does someone from group 4 want to share out?
Okay. I can hopefully share out quickly before my Wi-Fi dies again. Hopefully folks can hear me. So yeah, our group was talking about challenging dominant narratives and environmental racism. And so I think biggest wanted to make around challenging dominant narratives is making sure that when we're doing this work, we're not sort of only looking at the published plans and work that's been done in the past. I think we understand that there's a real need and a value to actually go out and see folks and communities and make sure that, you know, they're the ones getting to actually, you know, speak and voice their narrative rather than it being a kind of it's done. It's also important to make sure that we're hearing from folks outside of just like the working age and making sure that we're really reaching a diverse set of folks. We learn from our older folks and our younger folks, and sometimes they get left out of these systems and these processes because we're doing the work in a sort of 9-to-5 space that is really heavily reliant on the population that we know is not the full story. And in terms of making sure that, you know, what does it look like to have a space that is void of environmental racism? It's a space where the community is really educated about their communities and about the harms that they have been, you know, exposed to, and making sort of solutions rather than just identifying the problem. I think it's one thing to kind of continue to identify the problem, but we also need to provide something with efficacy that the community can hold on to and to make a difference in their spaces. We also need to make sure that thinking about what short-term things can be done. So, or what things need to be done first before we can kind of move on to larger issues. So for instance, if we don't really address the health issues that are happening in these communities, they aren't going to be able to be the voice of their community. If they are unable to leave their home because of bad air quality, or, you know, are, you know, in cancer diagnoses, all of these different things that aren't going to be the voice of their spaces, and what we're doing and where we is starting from a place where we're actually improving health outcomes and reducing the amount of these illnesses that are facing these communities. And then I think we want to highlight that a place without environmental racism, democratic, and it brings everybody in. There is, you know, clear and very known sort of discrimination and racism that the Black communities face. In these spaces, there are still white people, especially in the lower income white people who are affected. And how do we make sure we don't sort of leave them behind? Because I think we need everyone in the room and we need to bring everyone with us. And how do we educate those folks to make sure that when we bring them in, they're not creating more exclusion and not invalidating the experiences of our Black and brown communities? So it's a sort of tough conversation, but I think it's an important one to have. And then, yeah, I think, oh, and making sure that we don't forget that the inside of the home is an environment that we have to consider. There's a lot of things like VOCs, lead, asbestos, and just sort of older and not well maintained housing stock in Pittsburgh specifically. And so we want to make sure that we're not just talking about creating a better environment, but that we're, you know, ensuring that we have healthy and safe homes to go home to our times in. And so Just because we create, you know, a wonderful new stream that we've daylighted, it doesn't mean that people's homes are safe and healthy for them. And so let's make sure that we have the full story when we're doing this work. So hopefully that covered everything that everyone shared, but I really appreciated my groups.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're gonna move on just for interest of time because we are already at 12. Was there a group 5? Did you all have a board?
Yes, there was a group 5. We focused on sort of what we needed to thrive or when we felt like we thrived. And I think we all agreed that it was when we felt connected to our neighborhoods. But there was also concerns that that's changed since 2016. It's more difficult because of the politics that are in the air to make those kind of connections. But we talked about the importance of third spaces to those sorts of connections. And then in terms of the public health issue that we focused on, again, you know, at a massive political level, we all wanted minimum basic income, Medicare for all, but that focusing on that could sometimes fuel the rage of how can I make a difference doing that. So we focused on sort of the fact that a lot of what keeps people healthy is not so much it's what happens outside healthcare systems, and trying to find a way to build those healthy third spaces as a way to make progress, even when at a political level it sometimes seems hard to do so.
Right. Thanks so much. And let's move to group 6 and then Tina will be closing us out.
Thank you, Christina. And I'm actually giving the group 6 report out and closing us out. Group 6 got the opportunity to talk about who do we think of as community? What does it mean to share space with them? And then how are voices heard? Our group talked about changing identities of community. That one member noted that some of her community initially identified as Black and that more recently as Indigenous. Another member noted that community is very varied and fluid for them. As someone who's in multiple communities, that who community is differs as they move into different spaces. And then I shared, and I think others agreed that, you know, at some point there was a more geospatial definition with community. And it's now, for me, it's less about proximity and more about vulnerability and who I can trust. And that there are some, other folks noted there are some formal groups, but community is the folks where they feel a genuine connection and community, and that some of that was born out of necessity to respond to some of the environmental conditions they're facing. And then how are voices heard? Through some traditional methods of surveying, interviewing, but then through some of the more relational methods of building community and thinking about who actually cares to listen. And then another thing that was amplified is that we make sure that we allow community members to feel safe when they speak, and that in providing a safe space for them to be heard, we can really help to amplify community voices. So I know we are over on time, and I just wanted to close out this day to, if we can first just start by showing some appreciation to Dr. Christina Harrington for leading us through this exercise. That was amazing. It was wonderful prompts, and I enjoyed. I was like, oh, I'm with my people in my group 6. So thank you so much for that. I want to thank Kelly Henderson for pulling this wonderful panel together and for curating such a strong and varied group of voices to help us think about land equity. We heard from Dan Bain, from Jackie Walker, Stephanie Dangle, make sure I don't leave out even Christina Harrington, Dr. Harrington again, Kyla Pendergrass, and Isabella Gross. Thank you so much for sharing. And Dan, thank you for those images of Hazelwood. It is such a great segue into thinking about where we're going with part 3 of the series. We will be back together in person on June 10th at One Valley at the Roundhouse in Hazelwood. So as we as we come back together on June 10th, we will have what we're calling our Summit Day. It'll be an opportunity to hear from myself and Danny Wilson and Fernando Tomas Aponte will help set the stage on why we're talking about science, justice, and healing. Thank you, Andre. He's just added the registration link to the chat if anybody needs to see it. We also ask that you share it. We still have space for at least another 20 or so people to join us that day, so please share the invitation. We'll also have a great session on cumulative impacts. It'll be led by Joylette Portlock. And we'll also have sessions on cancer and environmental toxins with Molly Jacobs and Megan Tipre. And we are looking forward to continuing our environmental discourse panel. So for folks at Pitt who were with us when we talked before about discourse, we'll continue that in the community. And we're also excited to bring 2 dynamic sessions on healing at home by Nicole Kreidler, who's faculty at West Virginia University, and who will talk about her personal experience of healing with cancer. And we'll also have a session on grassroots organizing from 412 Justice. So again, thank you so much to our land equity panel. This was amazing. And we look forward to seeing as many of you as possible in person June 10th at One Valley at Roundhouse. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody,
Wonderful
especially
job.
speakers. Dan, do you mind if your slides are shared with the participants after the fact?
No, I don't think so. I should put some photo credits on there, I think.
Okay, Andre, I got confirmation from everybody else in the chat already except for Dr. Christina. Actually, if you don't mind just sending her a one-on-one email to ask her.
And I'll just put those on the version that's on the G drive or the G slides, and then
Sure. I will ask Christina and then get those sent out along with the recording, hopefully like Wednesday, Thursday. So
cool.
Y'all, this was such a fun group project.
Yeah.
Like,
it was good.
Really. Thank
was
you.
really good.
Together.
Thank you, everybody, especially since we didn't get to talk as a full group until last week. Appreciate
great.
you all. Yeah,
Well
that was
done.
great.
All right. See you on the 10th.
See you
Thanks so much,
then.
everyone.
Yeah,
Not
Tina,
before.
thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you,
Take care,
Kelly.
everybody.